If you're over 60 and finding yourself walking into rooms wondering why you're there, forgetting names of people you've known for years, or repeatedly asking the same questions, what I'm about to share could change everything about how you understand what's happening to your brain. Because that frustrating moment when you can't remember where you put your keys might not be just normal aging. And the good news is there are specific steps you can take starting today. I'm Dr. Emily Hartwell, and as a neurologist who has spent over 20 years working with older adults experiencing cognitive changes, I've seen firsthand how memory concerns can transform from minor frustrations into sources of deep anxiety and fear. But I've also witnessed remarkable improvements when people understand what's really happening and take the right actions. Before we begin, if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend hitting that button and turning on notifications so you never miss another health tip made especially for you. If you enjoy this video, please send video suggestions and questions in the comments. I read them all, which helps me create more videos and help more people like you. Now, let me tell you about something that happened just last month in my clinic that perfectly illustrates why understanding memory changes is so critical. A woman came to see me, clearly distressed, convinced she was developing dementia because she kept forgetting appointments and misplacing items around her house. After a thorough evaluation, we discovered something completely different was going on, and within weeks, her memory improved dramatically. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start by addressing the elephant in the room. Not all memory loss is created equal, and this is perhaps the most important thing I need you to understand today. There's a massive difference between normal age-related memory changes and the kind of memory problems that signal something more serious requiring immediate medical attention. As we age, our brains naturally undergo changes. The processing speed slows down a bit, like a computer that takes a few extra seconds to open a program. You might forget someone's name temporarily, but remember it later, or walk into a room and briefly forget your purpose before it comes back to you. These are typically normal age-related changes. What's not normal is forgetting entire conversations that happened yesterday, getting lost in familiar places, or having family members repeatedly express concern about significant memory problems you haven't noticed yourself. Let me tell you about Mr. Robert Chen, a 72-year-old retired accountant from Boston who came to my office last year. Robert had built a successful career managing complex financial portfolios, known for his incredible attention to detail and sharp memory for numbers. He lived with his wife Margaret in the same house they'd raised their 3 children in, and he took great pride in being the family historian, remembering every birthday, anniversary, and significant family event. For months, Margaret had been gently mentioning that Robert seemed more forgetful. He'd brush it off, saying everyone forgets things sometimes. But then came the morning that changed everything. Robert got dressed for church, something he'd done every Sunday for 50 years, and couldn't figure out how to button his shirt. He stood there, holding the fabric, completely confused about what to do next. Margaret found him and immediately called their daughter, who insisted they see a doctor that week. When Robert came to my office, he seemed embarrassed and frustrated. During our evaluation, I noticed he could tell me intricate details about his childhood, but struggled to remember what he'd eaten for breakfast. This pattern told me something important. His long-term memory was intact, but his short-term memory and ability to perform familiar tasks were declining. After comprehensive testing, we discovered Robert had early-stage Alzheimer's disease, but because we caught it early, we could implement strategies that significantly slowed his decline and maintained his quality of life for several more years. Robert's story illustrates something crucial. The key isn't whether you have some memory lapses, it's the pattern and severity of those lapses. And this brings me to the first major factor that affects memory in older adults that many people completely overlook. Sleep quality is absolutely fundamental to memory formation and retrieval, yet it's one of the most underestimated factors in cognitive health. During deep sleep, your brain consolidates memories, transferring information from short-term to long-term storage. It's like your brain is organizing files and saving them to the hard drive while you sleep. When sleep is disrupted or insufficient, This crucial process gets interrupted, and your memory suffers dramatically. I recently worked with Mrs. Dorothy Palmer, a 68-year-old former librarian from Philadelphia who loved reading and doing crossword puzzles. Dorothy prided herself on her sharp mind, and had always been the person family members called when they couldn't remember a historical fact or needed help with a complex problem. She lived alone in a cozy apartment filled with books, maintaining an active social life with her book club and volunteering at the local community center. Dorothy came to me deeply worried. Over 6 months, she'd noticed increasing difficulty remembering plots of books she'd just read, forgetting appointments despite writing them down, and struggling to recall words during conversations. She was terrified she was developing dementia like her mother had. She told me through tears that she'd rather die than lose her mind, that reading and learning were what made life worth living for her. I conducted a thorough evaluation, including cognitive testing, blood work, and a detailed sleep history. The cognitive tests showed mild impairment, but not the pattern I'd expect with dementia. Then Dorothy mentioned something that caught my attention. She said she rarely slept more than 4 or 5 hours a night, waking up multiple times, and she'd accepted this as normal aging. She also mentioned her husband had passed away 3 years ago, and she'd moved to a smaller apartment shortly after. We discovered Dorothy had severe sleep apnea, a condition where breathing stops repeatedly during sleep, cutting off oxygen to the brain. She also had significant anxiety and grief she hadn't processed, which was disrupting her sleep further. We treated the sleep apnea with a CPAP machine and connected her with a counselor to work through her grief. Within 3 months, Dorothy's memory improved so dramatically that she scored normally on cognitive testing. She told me it was like someone had lifted a fog from her brain. She'd been so certain she had dementia, but it was untreated sleep problems all along. If you're still watching and finding this information valuable, comment below to show you're with me. Because what I'm about to share next surprises almost everyone who hears it. Medications are a hidden culprit behind memory problems in older adults, and this is something I see repeatedly in my practice. Many common medications, especially when taken in combination, can significantly impair memory and cognitive function. We call these anticholinergic medications, and they block a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine that's crucial for memory and learning. The tricky part is that many of these medications are ones people take daily without realizing the cognitive impact. We're talking about certain antihistamines for allergies, medications for overactive bladder, some antidepressants, sleep aids, and even some medications for stomach acid. When older adults take multiple medications, which is incredibly common, the effects can compound dramatically. Let me tell you about Mr. James Kowalski, a 75-year-old retired postal worker from Chicago. James had worked for the Postal Service for 40 years, known for never forgetting an address or a face. He lived with his wife of 52 years, Anna, and spent his retirement woodworking in his garage, creating beautiful furniture for his grandchildren. He was proud of never having forgotten a single grandchild's birthday or school event. James started experiencing memory problems that progressively worsened over about 8 months. He'd forget conversations from earlier the same day, repeatedly tell the same stories, and once even forgot he'd already taken his evening medications and took them twice. Anna was frightened and brought him to see me, worried he had Alzheimer's disease like his father had. During our appointment, I reviewed James's medication list, and my suspicions were confirmed. He was taking a medication for seasonal allergies, another for frequent urination, a sleep aid, and an antidepressant, all of which had anticholinergic properties. His primary care doctor had prescribed each medication for legitimate reasons over several years, but no one had stepped back to look at the cumulative effect. We carefully worked with James's other doctors to adjust his medication regimen, finding alternatives that didn't have these cognitive side effects. It took about 6 weeks, but James's memory began improving dramatically. Anna called me in tears of joy, saying her husband was back. James himself told me it was like someone had turned the lights back on in his mind. He couldn't believe that the very medications meant to help him had been stealing his memories. This brings me to something that might surprise you even more. Chronic dehydration is remarkably common in older adults and can cause significant cognitive impairment that mimics dementia. As we age, our sense of thirst diminishes, and many older adults simply don't drink enough water throughout the day. Even mild dehydration can impair concentration, memory, and overall cognitive function. I'll never forget Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, a 69-year-old retired teacher from Miami, who had dedicated 40 years to teaching elementary school. Helen was known for her incredible memory for student names, remembering hundreds of students even decades after they'd been in her class. She lived with her daughter's family, helping care for her 3 grandchildren, which gave her life tremendous purpose and joy. Helen's daughter brought her to my office after noticing her mother becoming increasingly confused and forgetful over a few months. Helen would forget which grandchild had which activities, struggle to follow conversations, and seemed generally disoriented. The daughter was terrified her mother had dementia and might not be safe around the children anymore. Helen herself felt frustrated and scared, unable to understand why her once sharp mind was failing her. During the examination, I noticed Helen's lips were dry. Her skin had poor turgor, and her eyes appeared sunken. I asked about her fluid intake, and she admitted she probably only drank 1 or 2 small glasses of water per day. She said she didn't like getting up to use the bathroom frequently, especially at night, so she'd been limiting her fluid intake. Blood tests confirmed she was chronically dehydrated, and her sodium levels were abnormally high. We implemented a structured hydration plan, having Helen drink specific amounts of water at scheduled times throughout the day, with most of the intake before early evening to minimize nighttime bathroom trips. Within just 2 weeks, her daughter called me amazed at the transformation. Helen's confusion had cleared, her memory had improved dramatically, and she was back to being the engaged, sharp grandmother her family knew. Such a simple intervention, such profound results. But if you think that's surprising, wait until you hear about this next factor that affects memory in ways most people never consider. Social isolation and lack of mental stimulation create a devastating combination for brain health. Our brains need regular stimulation and social engagement to maintain cognitive function. When older adults become isolated, whether due to retirement, loss of a spouse, mobility issues, or other factors, their cognitive function can decline rapidly. The brain is like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. Mr. Arthur Bennett, a 71-year-old retired engineer from Seattle, exemplifies this perfectly. Arthur had spent his career designing aerospace components, solving complex mathematical problems daily. He was brilliant, holding several patents, and his colleagues had respected his analytical mind enormously. He'd been married to his wife Susan for 45 years, and they'd had an active social life with travel, dinner parties, and community involvement. When Susan passed away suddenly from a heart attack, Arthur was devastated. He withdrew from their social circles, stopped attending his engineering society meetings, and spent most of his days alone in their large house watching television. His 2 sons lived in different states and called regularly, but didn't realize how isolated their father had become. Arthur's neighbors noticed he seemed increasingly confused and forgetful when they occasionally spoke with him. After about a year of this isolation, Arthur's older son visited and was shocked by what he found. His father, who had been mentally sharp, seemed confused, was having trouble with basic tasks like paying bills, and had clearly lost significant weight. Frightened, the son brought Arthur to see me. Cognitive testing showed significant impairment, and I initially worried Arthur might have rapidly progressing dementia. However, as I dug deeper into Arthur's history and current lifestyle, I realized the timeline didn't quite fit typical dementia patterns. The decline had been rapid and coincided exactly with his social withdrawal. We developed a comprehensive plan that included grief counseling, joining a widower's support group, volunteering at a community center that helped students with math and science, and participating in a senior center's engineering club. Arthur's son also arranged for more frequent visits and video calls. The transformation took several months, but it was remarkable. As Arthur reconnected with people, engaged his mind with problem solving, and found new purpose in mentoring young students, his cognitive function improved dramatically. 6 months later, repeat testing showed he'd returned to near-normal cognitive function. He told me that losing Susan had made him want to disappear from the world, but he'd been disappearing from himself in the process. Reconnecting had literally saved his mind. This brings me to something I need to address that causes enormous confusion and anxiety. Depression in older adults often masquerades as dementia, and distinguishing between the two can be challenging even for experienced clinicians. We call this pseudodementia, and it's much more common than most people realize. Depression slows down thinking, impairs concentration, reduces motivation to engage mentally, and significantly affects memory. The person experiencing depression might genuinely struggle to remember things, not because their brain's memory systems are failing, but because depression is interfering with attention and encoding of new information. If you're not paying attention when something happens because depression has you mentally elsewhere, you won't remember it later. I think of Mrs. Barbara Mitchell, a 66-year-old former nurse from Denver who had spent 40 years caring for others in hospitals and clinics. Barbara had always been the caretaker, the strong one everyone relied on. She'd raised 4 children largely on her own after her husband left when the kids were young, and she'd done it all while working full-time as a nurse. Her identity was built around being capable, strong, and reliable. When Barbara retired, she struggled more than she'd anticipated. She'd expected to feel free and relaxed, but instead felt aimless and purposeless. Her children were grown with their own busy lives, and after decades of constant demands on her time and energy, she didn't know what to do with herself. She started noticing she couldn't remember things, would forget why she'd gone to the store, couldn't recall conversations with her children. Barbara became convinced she had Alzheimer's disease, and that after a lifetime of taking care of others, she would end up helpless and dependent, the one thing she'd always feared most. She became anxious and withdrawn, which only made her memory problems worse. Her daughter finally convinced her to see me after Barbara forgot an important family gathering completely, something the old Barbara would never have done. As I evaluated Barbara, I noticed several things. She seemed extremely anxious during testing and would say things like, "I can't do this," or "I'm so stupid," before even attempting tasks. She moved slowly, spoke quietly, and had a flat affect. Her memory problems were real, but the pattern didn't match typical dementia. She also endorsed significant depressive symptoms, feelings of worthlessness, loss of interest in activities she used to enjoy, and changes in sleep and appetite. I diagnosed Barbara with major depression and explained that her memory problems were likely secondary to the depression, not dementia. We started treatment with a combination of medication and therapy, specifically focusing on her identity transition from working nurse to retirement, and helping her find new sources of purpose and meaning. She also joined a volunteer organization that provided medical education in underserved communities, reconnecting with her nursing identity in a new way. Within 3 months, Barbara was like a different person. Her depression lifted, and remarkably, her memory problems resolved almost completely. She told me she felt like she'd gotten her brain back. The memory impairment had been real and terrifying, but it had been a symptom of depression, not dementia. Treating the underlying depression resolved the cognitive symptoms. Now, I want to talk about something that affects millions of older adults, but often goes undiagnosed. Vitamin deficiencies, particularly vitamin B12, vitamin D, and folate, can cause significant cognitive impairment, including memory problems. As we age, our ability to absorb certain nutrients decreases, and many older adults develop deficiencies without realizing it. Vitamin B12 is particularly important for brain health and cognitive function. Deficiency can cause memory problems, confusion, mood changes, and even symptoms that look exactly like dementia. The challenge is that B12 deficiency often develops gradually, and by the time symptoms appear, the deficiency has been present for quite a while. Mr. Leonard Shaw, a 73-year-old retired history professor from Boston, came to my office after his wife became alarmed by his increasing forgetfulness and personality changes. Leonard had taught history at a prestigious university for 30 years, known for his ability to recall obscure historical facts and dates with remarkable accuracy. He'd recently published his third book and was supposedly working on a fourth. He and his wife, Elizabeth, enjoyed an intellectually rich life filled with lectures, museums, and discussions with colleagues. Over about 18 months, Leonard had become increasingly forgetful. He'd repeat questions, forget meetings, and had abandoned work on his fourth book, which was completely unlike him. More concerning to Elizabeth, he'd become irritable and sometimes seemed confused about basic things. He'd also been complaining of numbness and tingling in his hands and feet, which his primary doctor had attributed to normal aging. When I examined Leonard, cognitive testing showed impairment, but again, something about the pattern didn't quite fit typical Alzheimer's disease. I ordered comprehensive blood work, including vitamin levels. The results were revealing. Leonard had severely low vitamin B12 levels. Further testing showed he had pernicious anemia, an autoimmune condition that prevents B12 absorption from food. This is relatively common in older adults, but often goes undiagnosed. We started Leonard on B12 injections, and the improvement was gradual but steady. Over 6 months, his memory improved significantly. The numbness in his hands and feet resolved, and his mood stabilized. Elizabeth told me it was like watching her husband come back to her. He resumed work on his book and told me he felt like his brain had been running through mud for the past year, and now it was clear again. A simple vitamin deficiency had caused symptoms that looked exactly like dementia. I need to address something else that's extremely important and affects many older adults. Hearing loss is surprisingly strongly linked to cognitive decline and memory problems. When you can't hear well, your brain has to work much harder to process and understand conversations. This increased cognitive load leaves fewer resources available for encoding those conversations into memory. Additionally, hearing loss often leads to social withdrawal. When it's difficult to follow conversations, especially in noisy environments like restaurants, many people start avoiding social situations. This isolation, as we discussed earlier, accelerates cognitive decline. Research has shown that treating hearing loss with hearing aids can significantly reduce the rate of cognitive decline. Mrs. Patricia O'Brien, a 70-year-old former elementary school principal from San Francisco, demonstrates this connection perfectly. Patricia had been a beloved principal, known for remembering every student and teacher in her school, always greeting people by name and asking about their families. She'd retired 5 years ago and stayed active with volunteer work and her garden club. She lived alone after her husband passed, but maintained close friendships and regular social activities. Patricia's friends started noticing she seemed less engaged in group settings. She'd often ask people to repeat themselves, would sometimes respond to questions inappropriately as if she'd misheard, and gradually started declining invitations to group activities. They assumed she was becoming depressed or possibly developing dementia. Patricia herself was frustrated and worried. She felt like she couldn't follow conversations anymore and couldn't remember what people told her. Her daughter brought her to see me, concerned about memory problems. During our conversation, I noticed Patricia was leaning forward intently, watching my lips as I spoke. When I faced away from her or covered my mouth while speaking, she clearly struggled to understand. I suspected hearing loss might be the primary issue. Hearing tests confirmed she had significant hearing loss in both ears, likely developing gradually over many years. She'd been compensating by lip reading without even realizing it. We referred Patricia to an audiologist who fitted her with hearing aids. The effect was almost immediate. Patricia could suddenly participate in conversations effortlessly. She returned to her social activities and within a couple of months told me her memory seemed to have improved dramatically. The reality was that she'd probably been hearing and therefore encoding conversations incorrectly, or not at all, leading to what appeared to be memory problems. Once she could hear properly, the apparent memory issues largely resolved. There's one more crucial factor I need to discuss, and this one affects far more people than you might think. Chronic stress and anxiety create significant memory problems through multiple mechanisms. When you're anxious, your attention is divided, you're less able to focus on encoding new information, and stress hormones can actually impair the parts of your brain responsible for memory formation. Many older adults carry enormous stress and worry, concerns about health, finances, family members, or their own future, and this chronic stress takes a real toll on cognitive function. The memory problems then create more anxiety, which worsens the memory problems further, creating a vicious cycle. Mr. George Thompson, a 67-year-old retired accountant from Atlanta, came to my office terrified he had early-onset Alzheimer's disease. George had been meticulous his entire career, managing complex accounts and never making errors. He'd retired early to care for his wife, who had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. For the past 3 years, he'd been his wife's primary caregiver, while also helping to care for his grandchildren several days a week so his daughter could work. George told me he couldn't remember simple things anymore, would forget if he'd given his wife her medications, couldn't remember conversations from the day before, and felt like his mind was failing. He was exhausted, overwhelmed, and deeply frightened. He said he felt like he was drowning, that he couldn't manage one more thing, and that if his memory was failing, he didn't know how he'd continue caring for his wife. As we talked, what became clear was that George was under extraordinary chronic stress. He was getting maybe 5 hours of fragmented sleep a night, had no time for himself, had given up all his hobbies and social activities, and was carrying the weight of multiple people's well-being on his shoulders. He had some of the highest anxiety scores I'd seen, and mild depression as well. George's memory problems were real, but they were the result of chronic stress, anxiety, sleep deprivation, and caregiver burnout, not dementia. We developed a comprehensive plan that included respite care so George could have breaks, therapy to help him process his grief and develop coping strategies, stress management techniques, and support groups for caregivers. We also worked with his family to distribute caregiving responsibilities more evenly. Over several months, as George's stress decreased and he started sleeping better, his memory improved substantially. He told me he still has occasional forgetfulness, as everyone does, but the pervasive feeling that his mind was failing had lifted. He learned that taking care of himself wasn't selfish, it was essential to being able to care for his wife effectively. So what does all of this mean for you? If you're experiencing memory problems, the first and most important step is to get a proper evaluation from a healthcare provider. Don't assume it's just normal aging, and don't assume it's Alzheimer's disease. As you've heard today, there are so many treatable causes of memory problems in older adults. Make sure your doctor checks your medication list carefully for drugs that might be affecting your cognition. Get comprehensive blood work, including vitamin levels. Have your hearing checked. Talk honestly about your sleep quality, mood, stress levels, and social engagement. All of these factors matter enormously. Second, prioritize your brain health proactively. Stay socially engaged even when it's difficult or you don't feel like it. Your brain needs that stimulation. Challenge your mind with new learning, whether that's a new language, musical instrument, craft, or just engaging conversations about complex topics. Keep reading, doing puzzles, playing games that require strategy. Take care of your physical health, which directly impacts your brain health. Exercise regularly, as physical activity improves blood flow to the brain and actually promotes growth of new brain cells. Eat a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and healthy fats. Control your blood pressure, diabetes, and cholesterol, as these conditions directly affect brain health. Get quality sleep, and if you're having sleep problems, address them. Don't accept poor sleep as inevitable with aging. Stay hydrated by drinking water throughout the day. Manage your stress through whatever techniques work for you, whether that's meditation, yoga, time in nature, or talking with friends and family. Most importantly, Don't suffer in silence. If you're worried about your memory, talk to your doctor. If you're feeling isolated, reach out to someone. If you're stressed and overwhelmed, ask for help. Your cognitive health matters, and in many cases, memory problems can be improved or resolved when the underlying cause is identified and addressed. I've seen it over and over in my practice. People come in terrified they have dementia, and we discover a treatable cause, whether that's medication side effects, vitamin deficiency, sleep apnea, depression, or chronic stress. Once we address the underlying issue, their memory improves, often dramatically. Don't give up hope if you're experiencing memory problems. Get evaluated, get answers, and know that many causes of memory impairment are treatable. Remember, your brain is remarkably resilient and capable of improvement even in older age. Take care of it, challenge it, nourish it, and don't hesitate to seek help when you need it. You deserve to maintain your cognitive health and quality of life, and in many cases, the steps to do that are within your reach. If you found this information helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. Leave your questions and experiences in the comments, as I read them all and use them to create future content. And please, if you're experiencing memory concerns, don't wait. Talk to your healthcare provider soon. Your brain and your future self will thank you.